Hey folks, um, I am going to do a little video today to show you this thing called loosely goosed HTML template. This is a very small, very simple HTML templating function that I wrote sort of for myself. It has a GitHub now, it's on NPM, and there's some instructions here about like the simple things you can do with it and the slightly more complicated things you can do with it down here. But some of these are very silly, and if you really want to do complicated templates, then you can use like handlebars or mustache or lit HTML or all these things that have more features built in. Let's get rid of this. So this is not a replacement for those. This is just if you have an object like this and you want to add the content to a HTML template so you can handle your HTML in your HTML, not in like template strings in your JavaScript or whatever, then this is a good option, and there are lots of libraries that do the same kind of thing as this. So you can take your pick. But let's switch over to CodePen. First, I'm going to grab the address from the CDN, and we're going to start by pulling it in here. So in the settings for CodePen, I'm going to JavaScript. I'm going to paste that URL in there, and now we have that library available. And there's not much to it. It's less than 100 lines of JavaScript. The main thing it should be doing is it should give us access to an object, and the object is called LGHT, so loosely goosed HTML template. And behind my head here, I'm going to move over on this side. We have an object, and let's see what's in there. Add content to target, new instance of template. These are the things that are internal to it, and add content to target is the one that we actually use. So we'll get rid of that, and let's get ready to use add content to target. So we can see in here it takes 3 arguments in an object. It's a template selector, a target selector, and a template data. And we can already see this looks like the ID of an element, and this looks like the ID of an element, and then this refers to article data, which is this object right here. So we have like the ingredients that we need, and let's go over here and set up something that will work. So on this side, let's see. We'll just start with giving it a title page. Title. Intro to templating with HTML and JS. Something like that will be fine. Then let's go ahead and decide, okay, underneath this, we want to have a series of posts. So we're going to create a target for those posts to live in. Let's be a div with the ID post target. This is a convention I find pretty easy to follow. If I call something post target, I know I'm going to put something in there, and then I have something else elsewhere called post template. So there could be a whole lot of HTML on this page, and then this template element. This template element should have an ID, so we can grab it, or some other thing that would be unique called post template will be fine. And inside of that, we're going to have our post HTML. So one way to do this is call it an article with a class of post, so we can do some styling later. And this article is going to have a header. So post title. We'll have a paragraph with content for the post. And you'll notice when you create a HTML element, a template element, it does not render onto the page. So if we were to change this to be a div, you'd see this content showing up down here. The nice thing about template elements is the assumption is that you're not going to want users to see an empty template. They exist so that you can grab them with JavaScript and do some manipulation, add some data in, and then show that somewhere. So this is really a nice thing to have available in HTML. In our JavaScript, all we're going to do to start with is connect our post template to our post target, and we'll see what happens. So loosely goosed HTML template.add content to target our function. And as we've seen, we know what to do with this. We need to give it a couple of things. And first we need to do it correctly because this needs to be inside. So first we'll give it a target selector. And it's just like anything that gets passed to document.query selector. It's just a CSS selector that refers to this div. So I'm going to call it post target. That will refer to the ID for post target. And then a template selector says where we're going to find the template that we want to put in post target. We're going to find that in an element called post template. Already they're connected. So it's finding everything that's in here for article, and it's putting it all inside this div right here. And finally, we have our template data. That's an object, and we haven't talked about that yet. Template data is where we're going to put anything that needs to be rendered into the template. So if we were getting like information from an API and we're saying, hey, what's the temperature? Somewhere in this template data object, we would have a field called temperature, and then somewhere in here, we'd refer to that field. So let's talk about how that works. Let's say we know we're going to want a title on our post, so we're going to have to get a title, and we'll put my first post. And we want content. Lots of interesting. And so we've created these two things, and you can see that nothing has changed down here. We're still just getting the default stuff that's built into the template. And that's because even though we've connected the template to the target, we have not explicitly referred to anything in the template data object. And so how this add content to target function works is it looks for references in here to see if they are on the object. And the way we make those references is with curly brackets. This is quite familiar if you've used JSX or something like that. So we'll just say title. Now my first post has a title. And in the content for post section, we'll put content. And now we're getting that lots of interesting content that we've been looking for. We're getting the stuff from this object in there. And that's not terribly useful if you only have one thing. But if you're going to render a lot of things, instead of passing the function just one object, you can give it an array. And so in this case, let's just copy a couple of these. Now it has an array of objects to look through, and it's going to render all of them. And since they're all the same, it's going to render 3 of the same. So before we go forward, let's just use this class of post and make these things a little easier to see. I'm going to give them a background color, and let's go goldenrod yellow. Great. And it looks kind of nasty on the inside. So padding, I don't know, 6 pixels. And we'll distinguish one from the other, so margin 10 pixels maybe. It seems like they're displaying in a very, very wide way, so we're going to say width 500 pixels. Just make that the max width, right? So some of them can be different sizes if they want. That'll be enough. So these are our posts. This is our data. If we change the data, second post, we're providing different data, and when a phrase reloads, we get my first post, my second post, my third post. That's the core of what this does. If you had 10 of these things coming through from a server request, you could render 10 of them into this template. If you had some content that was always the same, like a button that said add comment, I don't recommend buttons like this, but you could have a button that's repeated all the way through. So anything that's the same can still go in your template. Anything that's different from each template should go in your template data object. And you can do things that are a little bit different to just strings, but it's not able to do like title dot something dot something. We can't drill down into the object. It needs to be basically flat, or at least the properties you access need to be flat. But we could do something like timestamp. I'm going to provide that to just one of them. Instead of giving it a string or a number or something, we're going to do date.now. And so that's only in this second post. And so it doesn't matter. Our template's the same for every post. So let's go do a P and we'll do timestamp. So it's pretty forgiving of this. The timestamp shows up in the second post, but it does not break anything in the other posts. In Vue or in other frameworks, you may get an error thrown by those types of situations. This library will only throw an error if you're trying to render something that it can't turn into a string. So date.now returns a number, which is able to turn into a string. We could do something different in here. We could do like 8 plus 8. And we should get number 16 down here. You could do any expression or any function call that returns a value that can be coerced to a string, except true and false, which right now I just have not checked for. So that's the gist of how this works. There's one other kind of thing that we can do inside this data object, which is pass it a callback function. And the callback function can just say console log hello, I rendered third post. And so we can jump into our console here and it says hello, I rendered the third post. And if we copy this up to the second, post, add our comma, loads, we should see hello, I rendered the second post. Hello, I rendered the third post. And there are these little warnings in here referring to timestamp. And so in the first post and the third post, timestamp is still referred to in the template, but there's no data to match it. And so it's not going to throw an error, but it will put a warning in the console. So if you're trying to figure out what's going on there because you think you've given it the data, you get a little warning. So that's the gist of how this works. Any of the more advanced things are in here, a little bit of descriptions of what's acceptable and what's not. Some stuff you can do with the CSS, and then just some thoughts on what I learned from making this. The code is not very long. It's less than 100 lines of JavaScript, and it's mostly just getting through that template data object, verifying that what it's got is acceptable to put into a thing, and then throwing the error or throwing the warning if we want to, and then going through and doing the finding and replacing to add these things to the string. This is not a complicated concept. There are more efficient ways of doing it. There are other people who've done it in a similar way to this, but it has taught me a lot about the general challenges of how to do stuff like this. Okay, I think that'll do it.